Alright, hello. So we are about to embark on the first argument for the existence of God that your James Rachel's book talks about, the teleological argument, or as Rachel's calls it, the argument from design. Actually, the argument from design is a broader label, and the teleological argument is actually a specific type of argument from design, but this is the only type of argument design that we will be looking at in this class. So, moving on. Okay, as always, just like to give a little bit of a brief outline before I start lecturing. There isn't much to this. First, I just want to give a little bit of background to the teleological argument. Then I'll get into some major ideas, and then finally I'll give the teleological argument, Paley's teleological argument, in premise and conclusion form. Alrighty, so just a little bit of background before we get into the argument itself. First, just a little bit about what a teleological argument is. And essentially, you probably guessed the teleological argument is a type of argument for the existence of God. Now, as I referred to earlier, the teleological argument is often classified under the broader category of argument from design. The teleological argument is one type of argument from design. There are other types of arguments from design that we will not be looking at in this class. So the word teleological is something you probably haven't heard before. Actually, it derives from the word telos, which is actually Greek for purpose or goal. And this concept, telos, actually dates all the way back to Aristotle's time in ancient Greece. Aristotle actually believed that all things in nature, all natural things, have a goal or a purpose. And this goal or purpose is part of that thing's essence. So, for example, you might think about an apple tree, and you might ask yourself, what is the goal or purpose or telos of an apple tree? And you probably guessed that the telos or purpose of an apple tree is to grow apples, right? Or let's take another example, the telos of a heart. What is the goal or purpose of a heart? It is indeed, you guessed it, to pump blood. The telos of a tooth is to mash food. Telos of a dog is to be as dog-like as possible, and so on and so forth. So you probably have the idea of what a telos is, even though we don't use it today in our contemporary language. But telos, again, translates roughly into goal or purpose. So that gives us insight into what a teleological argument does. A teleological argument for the existence of God argues for the existence of God based on the purported purposefulness or orderness of the natural world, as we're about to see. Now, I should mention that this teleological argument for the existence of God actually does not start with William Paley. Actually, we see teleological type arguments for the existence of God dating all the way back to the ancient Greeks. In fact, you might see, if you read Plato or Aristotle, you see teleological type thought for a creator or for a greater being in their work as well. Socrates also talks a little bit about a teleological argument for God. You also see this in the work of Plotinus and St. Thomas Aquinas in the medieval period, but perhaps the most famous articulation of the argument was the one provided by this man over here, William Paley, who was an English clergyman and philosopher who was born in 1743 and died in 1805. Alright, moving on. Okay, so in this course we're only going to be focusing on Paley's version of the teleological argument for the existence of God. And you could find this argument in his publication, which I have right in front of me, entitled Natural Theology, which was published, I believe, in 1802. Okay, so in this Natural Theology, Paley asks us to imagine that he was walking in the great outdoors. He actually says, imagine that in crossing a heath, I pitched my foot against a stone. Now, for those of you who go hiking, right, probably most of you, if you go to Rancho San Antonio or Purisma, you've probably seen plenty of stones, right? And when you see a stone, you probably think, well, not terribly exciting, right? I've seen many stones in my life. But suppose somebody were to ask you, how did this stone come to be? You might just say, not a big deal. It came about through some natural process. Okay, and Paley would say the same thing. Now let's imagine that you were on a hike, and instead of a stone, you were to stumble upon a watch. Now, our reaction to the watch probably will be a little bit different, right? Especially if somebody asks us, how did the watch come to be? Well, you certainly would say that the watch came to be through some natural process like the stone, right? You would probably say that this watch had to be created by an intelligent being. In fact, Paley wants to say that even if you've never seen a watch before, if you were to find a watch like mechanism in the great outdoors, you probably would still infer that it was created by an intelligent being. So here we have two different reactions when it comes to a stone versus a watch, and I actually want you to think about what are the reasons behind these different responses? Why do we respond differently when it comes to a stone than we do when it comes to a watch? So just give you about 15 seconds to think about the answer to this question, and then we'll move on. So you probably have an idea, although maybe you can't articulate it fully, but here's what Paley says. He says, first, unlike a stone, a watch has many parts working together for a purpose, right? So I'm going to read actually directly from his natural theology. Paley says that when we see a watch, we see a cylindrical box containing elastic springs, which by its endeavor to relax itself turns around the box. We next observe a flexible chain communicating the action of the spring from the box to the fusee. We then find a series of wheels, the teeth of which can catch in and apply to each other, conducting the motion, and so on and so on. Okay, so the point is that there's this very, very elaborate process when it comes to the working of a watch. You have several parts working together for the purpose, which is to tell time. And Paley also reasons that if any of these parts were different, or if any of these parts were not present, then the entire watch itself, this entire mechanism itself, would no longer work. So both of these features, Paley reasons, is what is behind our conclusion that the watch must have been created by an intelligent designer. First, there are several complex parts working together for a purpose or a telos, and also if any of these parts were changed or not present or different, the watch would no longer fulfill its purpose. So you could probably anticipate what Paley's next move is. He wants to say that just like a watch that has several parts working together for a purpose and has parts that are indispensable, such that if any of them were different or missing, the whole mechanism would no longer work, Paley wants to say that these two features are also present in the natural world as well. So whether we're talking about trees, hearts, lungs, the whole ecosystem, all of these have parts that work together for a purpose. So we see the same type of complexity and purposefulness in natural objects as we do in watches, Paley wants to say. In fact, Paley wants to go farther and say that the complexity and purposefulness of nature is even greater and more breathtaking than the complexity and purposefulness of a watch. So, for example, let's take the human eye and how this works. And if you go to YouTube and type in the working and structure of the human eye, I believe a 5-minute video comes up. If you click on that video, it really shows that it really shows the wonders and the complexity and quite honestly the beauty of the workings of the human eye. But you have a very, very nice quote in James Rachel's text about the human eye. And this is directly from your book. Rachel says, take the human eye, for example. It is made of parts that work together in intricate, complicated ways. The light has an opening through which light enters, and there is a mechanism that automatically makes the opening larger and smaller depending on the amounts of light available. The light then passes through a lens that focuses on a sensitive surface, which in turn translates the patterns into signals that can be transmitted to the brain through the optic nerve. If any detail is changed, the whole thing stops working. Imagine that there was no hole in the front of the eyeball, or no lens, or no nerve connecting it to the brain, then everything else would be pointless. Okay, so just the human eye. you see just this incredibly intricate, complex, purposefulness, orderly process, such that if anything was changed, just the slightest change, if any slight detail is changed, the whole thing stops working. Okay, so just like a watch, Paley wants to say, the human eye exhibits these qualities as well. Okay, so we're about ready to drive the point home, but actually before I do that, I should mention that Paley doesn't exclusively focus only on the human eye. I think he would want to say that many natural objects, including the human eye, exhibit complexity and purposefulness such that we can infer an intelligent designer. Okay, but anyway, let's drive this point home. So we started off with the watch, and the watch exhibits these features, right? So we have several parts working together for a purpose such that if any part were different or missing, then the whole mechanism would stop working. So from these features, we can infer that the watch was created by an intelligent designer or a watchmaker in this case. So if we also hold the principle that like effects have like causes, then we would also have to say that the human eye, which also has several parts working together for a purpose such that if anything was different, the whole eye would stop working. We would also have to say that the human eye was created by an intelligent designer, or God in this case. So as you can see, the teleological argument that Paley gives is very much an argument from analogy. It's essentially saying that based on the similarities of a watch and an eye, we would also have to arrive at the same conclusion about them as far as their creation is concerned. Okay, so here it is in premise and conclusion form. Premise 1, we rightfully conclude that objects such as watches are made by intelligent designers because they have parts that work together to serve a purpose. Premise 2, we have the same evidence that parts of nature were made by an intelligent designer. The plants, animals, organs, and so on of the natural world are also composed of parts that work together for a purpose. Therefore, we are entitled to conclude that the natural world was made by an intelligent designer. All right, so there you have it. If you want to read some objections, particularly Hume's objection and the objection that came about from Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, be sure to read the Rachels. Other than that, thank you for tuning in, and as always, keep thinking.